Welcome back to a brand new Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're tackling one of the most infamous, wild stories in modern sports history. If you follow global football, you almost certainly know the headline. Basically, in the summer of 2006, Juventus, the absolute grandest club in Italy, was caught fixing matches, stripped of its championships, and banished to the second division. It's a clean, dramatic story, right? Clear villains, a spectacular fall, and a punishment that seemingly fit the crime perfectly. Well, that's the version of history that survived. But as we're about to uncover today, that headline is, in almost every single particular, way more complicated than you think.
So what exactly was Calciopoli? Okay, let's dive into this, because the reality of this scandal is not some simple Hollywood tale of briefcases full of cash being handed over in dark locker rooms. It is a messy, uncomfortable, and intensely gray reality of institutional rot, immense power, and two entirely different justice systems reaching completely different conclusions. We're going to strip away the myth and look at what actually happened here, step by step.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. The verdict you remember. 2. What the tapes actually showed. 3. The fast sporting clock. 4. The Scudetto and the fall. 5. The slow criminal clock. And finally 6. Did Juventus actually cheat?
Let's start with part 1, the verdict you remember, and that completely surreal summer of 2006.
Think back to May 2006. Transcripts of intercepted phone calls are suddenly splashed across Italy's major newspapers. The scandal breaks right as the national team is gearing up for the World Cup in Germany. And then, against all odds, on July 9th, Italy wins it. They crown themselves champions of the world. And yet, the very players lifting that trophy in Berlin, guys like Gianluigi Buffon and Fabio Cannavaro, belonged to domestic clubs that were literally burning to the ground in court back home. By late July, the sporting tribunals relegated Juventus. Talk about an unprecedented split screen of ultimate glory and absolute disgrace.
The name the Italian public gave this scandal really tells you everything about how they perceived it from day one. Calciopoli is a linguistic mashup of calcio, which means football, and tangentopoli, the massive political corruption scandal of the early 90s known as Bribesville. The fact they used that name proves the public immediately assumed they were looking at a deep, systemic web of institutional graft. They didn't see this as a few isolated bad referees. No way. They saw a massive, organized machine run entirely from the shadows.
Moving on to part 2, what the tapes actually showed. The gentle thumb on the scale. So the absolutely crucial point here is that Juventus Director General Luciano Moggi, the man right at the center of this hurricane, didn't target players on the pitch. You can forget those briefcases of cash we talked about earlier. He didn't even directly target the referees blowing the whistle. Instead, he targeted the designatori, the referee designators Paolo Bergamo and Pierluigi Pairetto. These guys held the immensely powerful, supposedly neutral job of assigning specific referees to specific matches. If you wanted to bend an entire league, this was the exact lever you'd pull.
There's a quote that brilliantly captures what the tapes actually revealed. The cumulative impression was not of a single corrupt transaction, but of a standing arrangement of access and pressure. That hits the nail on the head. The tape showed a culture of deeply uncomfortable intimacy. They showed Moggi constantly calling the designators, lobbying, complaining, exerting massive career pressure. It was essentially a gentle thumb on the scale. But crucially, and this is a big but, the tapes utterly lacked unambiguous, explicit proof of predetermined scorelines. There was absolutely no audio of someone saying, hey, make sure we win 2-0 today. It was all about tilting the environment.
Which brings us to part 3, the fast sporting clock and its swift, brutal justice.
Now, multiple clubs were implicated in very similar conduct, but you have to look at the extreme divergence in consequences. Juventus was just absolutely dismantled, stripped of 2 titles, and relegated straight to Serie B. Meanwhile, AC Milan, Fiorentina, and Lazio, they merely suffered bruises. They were handed points deductions, sure, but they all stayed up in the top division Serie A. Milan even got to keep their spot in the Champions League, which they went on to win the very next year.
And what's truly fascinating is how Juventus's penalty evolved behind closed doors. Their initial sentence was a massive 30-point deduction for their upcoming season in Serie B. I mean, a penalty so severe it threatened to trap them in the lower league for years. But then, on the first appeal, it magically dropped to 17 points. And on the final appeal, reduced to just 9 points. This sliding scale is a huge giveaway. It proves that this uncompromising sporting justice wasn't a rigid application of the law. It was highly negotiated. It was profoundly influenced by a climate of massive public fury that demanded a heavy initial hammer before quietly softening the blow behind the scenes.
Part 4. The Scudetto and the fall. The cardboard title and Serie B.
The decisions made around the titles basically divided Italian football forever. The 2004-2005 title was revoked from Juventus and left completely unassigned, just a void in the history books. But the very next season, 2005-2006, was handled entirely differently. It was stripped from Juventus and controversially handed over, essentially in an office boardroom, to the third-place finisher Inter Milan. This glaring inconsistency created a wound that genuinely hasn't healed to this day. Juventus fans, and frankly a lot of Inter's critics, bitterly referred to this prize as the Scudetto di Cartone, the cardboard title, a trophy won in a boardroom, not on the grass.
For Juventus as a club, relegation was a historic identity crisis. These guys were the aristocracy of Italian football. They had never been sent down. The financial and emotional fall was just staggering. But, in that darkness, a pretty incredible mythology was born. Fresh World Cup winners like Gianluigi Buffon and legendary captain Alessandro Del Piero famously refused to leave. They chose to play in provincial, second-tier stadiums just to rebuild the club they loved. That loyalty cemented a fierce siege mentality among the fan base that still burns brightly today.
Now, Part 5. The slow criminal clock and the grinding wheels of justice.
We really need to highlight the vast difference between the two systems evaluating the exact same facts here. Sporting justice operates on a very fast clock. It relies on a standard of mere probability to punish breaches of the sports code, things like improper relationships. But the criminal justice system, it is the complete opposite. It's incredibly slow, it demands proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and it punishes actual, proven criminal fraud. This difference totally explains how you can have two completely different legal realities stem from the exact same set of wiretaps.
Let's track this criminal timeline because it's wild. The trial didn't even open in Naples until 2008. Then in 2011, there was a first-instance conviction of Luciano Moggi for criminal association, basically the grand charge that he ran a massive organized fixing machine. But remember, in Italy, a conviction isn't final until the Supreme Court rules on it. So by 2015, when it finally reached the top, that grand charge had completely crumbled. Because so much time had passed, the central charges were ruled time-barred. The statute of limitations had simply expired. The grand organized match-fixing conspiracy was never definitively proven in the eyes of the law.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate tragedy of the whole affair. Years later, a second wave of wiretaps emerged, known as Calciopoli bis. These new tapes revealed that other clubs, including Inter Milan, the very team awarded that cardboard title, were implicated in similar referee lobbying and pressure. But there was a catch. The statute of limitations had already expired for sporting justice. The Federation's prosecutor acknowledged the code violations, but no new sporting punishments could be legally applied. Rival clubs were saved purely by the calendar, creating this undeniable legacy of selective enforcement.
Finally, Part 6. Did Juventus actually cheat? The three-part truth.
So after all of that, did Juventus actually cheat? I need your full focus for this because the answer isn't a simple yes or no. The truth actually comes in three distinct parts. Let's break them down. The first truth is, yes, Juventus executives absolutely behaved corruptly. The volume and the intimacy of their contacts with the referee designators were highly improper. They exerted systemic pressure, they lobbied constantly, and they successfully tilted the environment. They compromised the sporting integrity of the league. To deny this is to just ignore the reality of what was on those tapes.
But the second truth is no. That headline you remember, it's basically false. They weren't proven in criminal court to affix specific matches with predetermined results. The criminal justice system utterly failed to prove the existence of a grand organized match-fixing machine. The sporting tribunal itself even explicitly declined to certify that matches were predetermined. The ultimate smoking gun never actually existed.
And the third and final truth is also no. Justice wasn't truly served here. The swift hammer of that sporting justice was fundamentally disproportionate. Juventus was completely destroyed, while rival clubs who engaged in remarkably similar conduct were merely bruised, or worse, completely shielded by the passage of time. This inconsistency forever taints the fairness of the outcome.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Can a justice system that punishes based on the clock, rather than the actual crime, ever truly heal a sport? Calciopoli wasn't just a simple crime that was simply punished. It was a genuine wrong, messily judged, where the punishment was totally uneven, and true justice never quite caught up. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep asking those tough questions, and I'll see you in the next explainer.